Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 42nd episode of Retuning Your Firm. Very happy to be with you today and very much looking forward to a fantastic panel. So, what are today's themes? There are three. First of all, we're looking at the area of innovation, and I'm delighted that Tim Vorley, who is a Professor of Innovation, he's also Dean of Oxford Brookes Business School, is here today to talk about innovation, particularly in the context of a project that is coming to the close. There's a session coming up on the 17th of March, as you may recall, where we're looking at a flagship and giving you all the information. Tim's going to talk about that and the key role of design sprints, which, if you're not familiar with them, is a really interesting and effective way to do things. The second area we're looking at is culture. And we're looking at the hard side of culture. Everybody thinks culture is very soft. What's the hard side of culture? How do you actually achieve that? And then we're looking at leaders and leadership, and delighted that Andrew Mayo is going to come and talk to us there. So who are the people that are on today? As I mentioned before, Tim Vorley, who is the Dean and Pro Vice Chancellor of Oxford Brookes Business School, and you'll see his bio in the documentation that we shared. Next, Rupert Graf von Pfeil, I think I pronounced that correctly, forgive me if not. And he is a partner in Venturist Consulting Group, primarily based in continental Europe and working mainly with the legal sector, but not exclusively. Andrew Mayo, I mentioned, who's director of Mayo Learning International, very accomplished author. Everybody kind of in his world really knows what he has a lot to say. So talk about leader and leadership and what's the key difference between them and how we need to be aware of that. Our anchor tenant, Francesca, if we're 42 today, she's on 41, so never quite catch me up, hey, that's another story. And she's going to miss one in 2 weeks' time, but I have got, not a substitute, but I have got somebody who Phil's going to come and fill her place, hopefully. And lastly, of course, yours truly, Richard Chaplin, who is the founder and chief exec of the Managing Partners Forum. So that's the lineup for today's panel. And just thought I'd remind you that today's panel will give their 5-minute slots, but they're all available. You can go onto the forum website, you can see the link there, and for free, you can look at the contributions of over 100 people now since last March. And to give you an example, Seamus Ray, who was on last week, he's already had over 60 people have viewed his video. So it really is going out there, and we're really getting out to a lot of people in spite of this being a very, very busy world in terms of places you could go and spend your 5 minutes looking at interesting ideas. So that's nice. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, let's just run back to our core messages that we kind of run through every week, but I do think they're so important. First of all, think big. You have to believe 6 impossible things before breakfast, as Lewis Carroll memorably once said. You have to think small. You have to think about what are the angles that are really going to resonate. We're in a very busy world in terms of the online. Everybody's pushing out papers. Everybody's pushing out thought leadership. Everybody's doing things. It's quite hard to be noticed, particularly if you, like most professional firms, possibly feel that it's hard to differentiate yourself. So think about the angles that will really resonate with your key audiences. And it's not just clients, it's your own people as well. It's the intermediaries, it's the people who work with you. Remember that you are the power of your relationships. And that's a really important thing to say, because at the end of the day, we all have address books, but that's not the same as relationships. So, and it's all about reciprocity. It's about favors. It's about win-win. That's what really brings people together, because at the end of the day, I always say if you give more than you get more back. I mean, it doesn't make sense at one level, but it absolutely does to me. Think about campaigns. Think about things that actually will really convert your audience into a community. Think about things that bring your clients together, share things to help them. You've got to drop convention. We're all are we talking about the new normal? That's kind of gone off the agenda now. I think it's post-COVID is probably closer, but that means BC now means before COVID, if I'm not being blasphemous. So think about new ideas and new services, because there's lots of opportunities that really weren't there. And Rupprecht was talking a minute ago in the green room about how he's now able to convene groups of managing partners across Germany and Austria in ways that previously just wouldn't have been possible because of the traveling dimension. So what can you do that's different? Think about that. But do it quickly. Do it quickly. Speed is the essence. But then, and it's a really key point, think about how you do it, the process, because the key to it here is to articulate your assumptions. What is it that you absolutely are trying to do? And spell them out. As an accountant, I know that accounting policies are assumptions. So change the policies, change the profit, easy. But what are the assumptions that under test? And then when you go out with anything, you're market testing it. And I'll be talking to you today about a new product that we're doing, which I think is quite fun. And then when they prove invalid, I think I put if there, but when, because we all know experiments fail. Every scientist knows that. When they're proven invalid, amend them and pivot in a new direction. And that depersonalizes it. All too often, you have partners at loggerheads. This is my idea, this is mine. No. Think about what are the assumptions? Who owns the assumptions? Well, nobody, actually. And put the most skeptical person to go and market test them as well, because then if they come back, it's a Saul in Damascus. So be entrepreneurial. Keep listening and innovating. And guess what? I know Tim may disagree with me there, but the most important word in my mind in that sentence is listening. And I'm not a professor of innovation, by the way, but that's what it's really all about. Because if you're listening, you're in alignment with your clients, you're in alignment with your people, and that takes you to a good place. And I'd like to thank Elena Kudsko of Globsec Bratislava. Back in April of last year, I was on a call on a town hall think tank with her. And okay, she didn't come up with quite that list, but I just thought they are amazing. Keep those in mind. I try to. I'm sure I fail occasionally, but that's not the point. So what's going up? Well, Tim will be talking a bit later about fast track innovation. I'm not expecting you to read anything possibly than the red words, but property and other applications sustaining your firm's culture in a post-lockdown world. With this, we're doing this with managing partners. We did the finance guys. We had 27 finance people who came down there, and it was fascinating. A lot of people are saying, well, I'm not quite sure what to do. Do we have everybody on one big video screen, or do we all have individual screens even if we're in the same room? Because guess what? If you've got a room for 20 people and 3 people are social distancing, it feels completely weird, etc. And it's nobody really knows the answers. So trying to explore that. So we've got a group of managing partners who are going to be looking at that, interestingly, on Tuesday. So that's exciting. Today is the day that the awards close. But if you're listening and you're desperate for an extension, drop me an email. I'm sure I can accommodate. But we're expecting a flood of things to come in. I just had a note in from a guy in California, literally, who said, Richard, we haven't been in touch for 12 years, but this year I really want to go in because there's nothing else around. So I thought, great, fantastic, love it. So I wanted to talk to you about one new thing that we're doing just before I get into the polls, because I think it's quite interesting. I mentioned one of the top priorities for management is sustaining a collaborative culture post-COVID. And we all know that regular team updates are absolutely mission critical, but they're not enough. Your people need to interact. And there's only really 2 places they can interact. Face-to-face, but as we all know, offices are actually very expensive, as we found out last week. £1,000 per employee per month is not unusual. And that's a rent of about £60 a square foot, by the way, which isn't crazy. And guess what? Post-COVID could be 50% underutilized. That's the sort of numbers that we're seeing in a whole bunch of surveys. Online, really cheap, maybe £5, £20, whatever, per employee per month, and available 24/7. But, and there's a big but, the only one we've come across that really facilitates introductions across a busy room or random informal conversations is called Remo. And we've done quite a lot of research. So what we've done, we've developed, it's quite fun this, a secure, private, confidential, 24/7 intra-lounge, I'll actually trademark the word, in Remo with unlimited video for up to 800 seats on an amazing 3D floor plan for just £5 a seat a month. Happy to do a 1-month trial. And let me just show you this floor plan because it really is quite fun. Can you imagine something that is 3D that looks where your people come together? And I'll just blow it up a bit more so you can actually see some of the detail. And that's what's available for our forum members. It's a membership service. And some of you I know are not members on this call, but hey, that might just get you across the line. So let's move on. Polls. Your poll results are incredibly valuable analysis during these dynamic times. I did one last week on professionalism, as you may remember. I was talking to the minister about it yesterday, literally. So where else does it go? Well, it goes to the House of Lords report. They did a report back in October looking at future of UK-EU relationships. Sadly, not too many of their suggestions were taken up by the government. That's another story. But the report, we were the only poll that was carried in it that wasn't sourced from government. So what happened last week? We looked at professionalism. And there was a very strong message that the ethical dimension, the ethical competencies, was the most important dimension of professionalism. In terms of attributes of professionalism, this one's a little bit harder to read, I appreciate. But the thing I think was really important is if you look at the right-hand side, that the attributes that are seen to be the most important to show your professionalism, because to me, professionalism is fundamentally about behavior, were ethical, were about being knowledgeable, were being competent, and were being diligent. Trustworthy didn't really come up very strong, about 5th. Transparency, hardly at all. And only if you were in the health professions did caring matter. Possibly the idea of a caring lawyer might be seen as an oxymoron, but I don't want to offend any lawyers on the call today. But basically, there is clearly a set of attributes which are seen as important. Equally, given the point about behavior, when people are perceived to be elitist or not having empathy or defensive or lacking in transparency or just misconduct, that really is seen to have quite a significant impact on the perception of professionalism of our sector. And that matters because actually there was massive agreement that professionalism should be promoted as a key attribute of our sector when seeking work from clients. 96% agreed with that, which is, I think, in any poll I've ever done, about as an emphatic message as is possible to give. And equally, people said that, look, it's not just good enough to say we're a professional person in a rather sort of boring way. You've got to be passionate about it. You've got to actually, your personal morality has got to be the thing that really demonstrates your professionalism. And what are the three messages that one should be thinking about? Well, let's focus on our ethical competence. And I gave a really interesting example. I mean, years ago, I'm an ACA, so I studied accountancy. I did a tax exam. Francesca would know all about tax. I don't. But technically, I could probably give tax advice to somebody. Now, my forbearance as a professional says to me, I'm really not going to help my friend very much if I give them poor advice. So I'd rather refer them to somebody like Francesca who knows that stuff. That's, to me, being ethical. Then the technical competence. And the third one's quite interesting, is the volunteering. That actually this is all about something that we as a sector are, talk to business and the community. We are the number one sector to help in that space, no question. And I'm sure we'll see more of that. Responsible business, sometimes called. And perhaps on a political level, are we an antidote to populism? Yep, people think we are. So that's some interesting research. And I said I was with the Minister, Jerry Grimstone, yesterday, and Andy Friedman of Palm, who's written a book on professionalism. And we're going to be looking at how we can move that forward as a group, which I think is really interesting, with Bays on the call as well. So there you go. So that's my little intro for this week. Just likely now say that we're doing the monthly sector tracker today, which is done every month. And obviously looking forward to doing it. So let's have a look at the results. And you can scroll down if you're not sure how the technology works for you. The ones that always seem to come through very strongly are operational efficiency, which again is up there in the red, number one. Also, people skills and capabilities, Andrew will be pleased to see, and delivering a purpose and strategy, which is playing, I think, to Rupprecht's area of expertise. Technology, just behind that at 33. So I think all our panelists today have got a reason to be happy over those results for the first question. In terms of where is the dip of firms' income, 80% is none now. That is, again, I'll show you next week as to how that shows, but believe me, what we're looking at now is a much rosier picture even than last month. In terms of expanding and contracting the level of activity, there is, for the first time ever, nobody is looking at contracting over the next year. That hasn't happened any time over the past 12 months, I can promise you that. Super significant expansion is only 3%, that's not relevant, but 87% of view a modest expansion. And the same in terms of the new workflow. And also, and this is only maybe 2/3, in terms of headcount. And if I think back to the difficult period that we were navigating through the middle and towards the end of last year, all the firms that were expecting to contract their headcount significantly outweighed those that were looking to expand it. And now we have a mere 3% looking to contract. The government would be really pleased to see that, because that's really helpful. It shows a lot of things. In terms of working from home, interesting, slightly different mix today. We've normally had about 20%, everyone working from home. Today it's 30%. So maybe people are actually thinking this really is a new way of working. And whereas obviously nobody is thinking of going back full time to the office. And there's about even Stevens between around half and around 3/4. So I think 2.7 days in the office is the number I've seen on lots of surveys, and that pretty much bears that one out. In terms of office space, though, about the same. So people are thinking of reusing their office space. A lot of people talk about social areas. They're talking about possibly gyms, but other ways of using the space. Because one thing you did find back in July was that when the millennials came back into the office, the atmosphere was so different that half of them said, oh, don't really like that, going back to the work from home. So at least I know where I'm at. So we'll see where that one emerges. But some people are now no one's going for more, but some people are still going for less. But I think, again, there's a sense that property isn't going to be slightly changing. And that might be good news for the property people on the call, of course. In terms of the constraints, financial health of the client base and the poor economic outlook remain even Stephen, 63%. Absolutely, they are the top two, and that remains consistent with last month. Now, this is fascinating. Marketing has overtaken finance. That's the first time ever as the area which is carrying the most weight in partner discussions. I've never seen that before. Our marketing community will be elated to see those stats, believe me. And lastly, what do we think? What are our leadership? And Andrew will find this really interesting, I expect. Actually, the numbers that are coming through there are in the sort of 70 to 80% of people who are really happy and satisfied with their leadership and its contribution. And Andrew Kakabadze, who has been on this show, if you recall, in previous months, was saying that those are, compared with any other sector, incredibly positive feedback towards the leader. Now, we've been seeing a few ups and downs with McKinsey in the past few days, with Kevin losing his job and stuff like that. So there may be some other issues there, but certainly across this group, they're very happy with their leaders. 93% leaders are accessible. I mean, those numbers are really, really high, I think. Okay, I think that's probably about enough for me. So I'm now going to invite our first guest, who is Tim Vorley, to come and share his thoughts for today.
Hi there. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me on the show again. I suppose just this morning and picking up on some of the key themes, and also the flagship event that Richard mentioned, which Richard is obviously one of the co-investigators on the project that you've heard a lot about over the last 42 episodes at different points, looking at really how we can support the next generation of professional service firms, and obviously innovation is a key aspect of that. We have an event coming up on the 17th of March, as Richard said, which is being hosted with and in conjunction with the forum. And we're really pleased to invite those on today's webinar along to hear more about those ideas that have come out of the project, the research from that, as well as other firm-wide leaders that are really at the fore of some of these debates. So I suppose in relation to the question that Richard's posed and the topic of today around innovation, I suppose one of the key things from my perspective, and a lot of the work that I do and have done over the years with Innovate UK, is to say that innovation is fundamentally about more than the technology. Really, when we think about many of the innovative projects that have been funded over the years, we see these often as standalone successes, but the biggest challenge is often integrating them into the business model and changing the business model itself. Now, on the results from the poll this morning, it was interesting to see that business models weren't necessarily up there at the top. But one of the interesting things when I look down the list of things that were being prioritized, a lot of those remain aspects of the business model that we're seeing transformed. And so when we think about innovation, we can think about business model innovation much more broadly. And I think it brings everything on that list back into play, which for me is really encouraging and important, but perhaps sends out an important message that if we just talk about business model innovation or we talk about just the business model, we might not be attracting those that really want to kind of hear and learn from those ideas, which they've actually said are important in other guises. So how can we support innovation in the firm? We know that generally the professions as a whole are risk averse. They're not highly innovative in many senses compared to other sectors, but we are seeing that change. The pandemic has seen an embracing of technology in different ways. And as I've said before on this show, one of the big challenges for me when it comes to technology and innovation is the fact that what we don't want to do is simply employ technology to persist existing ways of working. We need to think about how we change and how we develop as well. How can we become more efficient, more competitive, more productive and more profitable through the innovations that we bring into the firm? Now, those innovations for me kind of within the business model sit within three areas. We can, of course, talk about the product or the process, the service that we offer, the offering, but actually it's about much more than that. And I think many of the things in the survey and that have been talked about over the last 42 episodes really do kind of come down to the fact that there's lots here to think about with respect to how we're configured internally and also how we engage with our clients and our customers and think about the experience that they're getting as the business model changes and evolves. So how do we do this? How do we be better at this within the firm? Now, I'm not going to sit here, although our project was very much on AI readiness, looking at the digitization, the digitalization and the digital transformation of firms, thinking much more about how we can bring those out through the people who are some of the key and core assets that our organizations have. We need to engender a greater sense of collaboration, sharing ideas. We need to be open-minded And we need to think about how employing different technologies affects those people and how we can look to change the world of work and the nature of the workplace that they really kind of live and exist within in the professions. Richard's already mentioned this morning the importance of listening, and I think communication both ways is really important here, both within the firm, but also external to the firm. And I think that that's absolutely key for change management, thinking about how we can improve and who we're improving for. A lot of the time when I spend my time talking to firms about what they're doing, I think one of the key things that we need to think about is that when we talk about creating value, it's who we're creating value for. Often we think about the creation of value as increasing profits and profitability, but if we look to try and enhance and create value for our clients and customers, often the nature of that value creation is a lot more sustainable. So I've mentioned already, innovation isn't just about the tech, but it's about doing business differently. And sometimes that needs to encourage us within the businesses that we're part of and within the organizations, and being a leader within a university context, this is no different for me. We need to think about the problems and the challenges that our users, that our clients, our customers, our beneficiaries want to take away from us, and how we can continue to address that in what is a paradigmatically different context to where we were 15, 16 months ago. And I think there's huge opportunity in there. Sometimes what that means is that we need to disrupt, we need to rethink, we need to approach the puzzle differently, but we also need to have that empathy. We need to understand both what our employees are doing, what our workers are doing, the partners in firms, but also those that we are working for that are beyond the firm as well. How do we make sure that they're getting from us and our services something that actually fulfills their needs, and that increasingly what they're willing to do is to pay for at a higher value? So the final couple of points that I'd just like to make is that we talk a lot about how this change isn't something that is just technology based, but we need to make sure that we have the right skills. I think there's an important part to play here, thinking about skills within the firm, thinking about how we develop those employees that we have, those partners, how do we make sure, and how do we open their mindsets to that? Some of the work coming from our research shows that there is that resistance that is constructed around professional norms. How do we overcome, challenge, and develop those norms so we can embrace technology and what that has to offer while enhancing the role and the value that the professional brings into the firm? So just by way of closing, again, want to mention the event that Richard is hosting with us. As part of the project, we're very much going to be looking at the role of design sprints. And I think that one of the key things that design brings to the professions that hopefully will add value is really trying to understand the problem and the challenge that we're trying to address here. I think when we see many of these technological solutions on the shelf, whether they be AI-based or otherwise, I think we need to understand the nature of the business problem that is being addressed with these particular technologies. Often the technologies themselves are very narrow by nature. We're not talking about turning the average law firm or accountancy firm, if there is such a thing, into an AI-enabled firm. But what we're trying to do is to enhance particular areas of professional practice. Now, again, through the work that we've been doing on the project, the design sprints that we've been holding, working with professional services firms to help them think about how they can change their strategy, how they can develop their approach to really incorporate and benefit the most from some of these technologies, it's important that we think about a wider range and variety of factors. And the nature of the design sprint does exactly that. So if you are interested in finding out more information, please do attend the event. I'll put a link and my email in the chat afterwards. We have a number of toolkits that are available, targeted particularly at professional firms. Through the project, we are trying to work with and continuing to hold design sprints and future scenario workshops with professional services firms. So if you'd like more information, please contact myself or Richard, and we'd be delighted to work with you further on some of this. So thank you, Richard.
No, thank you very much. And showing myself for the first time today. Weird. No, what I was really going to say was thank you very much, Tim. And I know Tim has unfortunately to leave us a bit early today with his leadership of a massive business school to deal with, all remotely as well, as I understand it. So I'd now like to invite Rupprecht to come and give us his thoughts for the day on culture, but in particularly hard culture. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Richard. So today we are, in a larger sense, today we are talking a lot about positioning strategy, business success. And in that context, I want to shed some light on the role culture can have as a hard factor. And I want to start with a famous quote of the late Peter Drucker: "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And what Peter Drucker wanted to point at was that actually culture is what we say the hidden success factor for strategy implementation. And that is the first thesis out of three I want to present to you and to discuss later in some depth. The second one is culture is a hard, economically relevant success factor and not a nice to have. And the third one is that culture can be shaped and be aligned to a firm's strategy. Now let's expand a little bit on the three theses. So the first one, culture is the hidden success factor for strategy and strategy implementation. And first, perhaps then, what is culture? Culture is the way we do things here around, or in a more sophisticated way, culture is the sum of all the accepted behaviors within a firm. Those are two definitions used in scientific circles. And if we ask the question, why are so many initiatives, mergers, etc., not living up to the expected results? It is helpful to start and to have a look at the iceberg model. Yes, and what we see above the waterline, what we call the surface structure, are concepts, strategy papers, everything which is cognitive. And if we then look below the waterline, what we call the deep structure, we have a very different breed. What we see there, that's thoughts, emotions, assumptions, values, identity, mental models, needs, etc. And the truth of the matter is that actually our behaviors are driven by what is below the waterline, by the deep structure. And if there is no alignment, then it's no wonder that everything is above the waterline is not going to happen. And if we think about a new strategy normally implies that we do things differently, and not totally differently, but in certain aspects, in certain areas. And that pits the strategy automatically against the current culture. And people don't change just because of a piece of paper called strategy or because of a partnership decision. So the result is that if there is no alignment, that there is a huge risk that culture can become a major roadblock for the implementation of a strategy or whichever strategic initiative. So to make that strategic initiative or the implementation of it a success, it is necessary to understand the gaps between the current culture and the current and the future behaviors which are required for a successful implementation of the strategy. And if we approach culture from that angle, it becomes clear that culture is a hidden key success factor for the success of whichever strategy a firm wants to implement. So if we then go to the second thesis, culture is a hard, economically relevant success factor. We can build on research that shows that there's a direct link between culture and economic success. And there are several scientific studies showing that various dimensions have an impact on this economic success, on the financial success, to the point that the research says more than 30% of the financial success, of the economic success, relates to culture. And out of various cultural dimensions, 6 have a direct high impact on financial success, which are corporate social responsibility, growth opportunities, care for people, identification, job involvement, job satisfaction. Third and final thesis, culture can be shaped and be aligned to a firm's new strategy. We call this cultural backward re-engineering based on a assessment of the current culture, the status quo, if you want to, and then a 4-step process. The first step is to define the behaviors needed to implement the new strategy. And in the second step, identify the values, and by that, the cultural dimensions linked to those values behind those behaviors. Thirdly, to calculate the gap between today's status quo and the future culture. And based on the results, that's the 4th step, to take a very targeted action plan on the specific cultural dimensions behind each value. This process allows actually, in a very focused way, to make the current culture evolve towards the desired future culture. And my 5 minutes are up, and I hope I was able to show that culture is not a nice to have, but quite an important success factor, having impact on the hardest dimension professional service firms, their profitability. Thank you, Richard.
Well, a little bit of a joke here for Francesca, but we were talking a couple of weeks ago about nuclear submarines, and we're now talking about icebergs, but no doubt you'll pick that up later. But Andrew, come and tell us. Andrew's calling us today from Perth in Australia, and I think that's about as far moved as we have anyone on the show today. No, Reddy Cruz came in from Sydney, Melbourne actually earlier. But anyway, welcome, sir, and really looking forward to your thoughts. And I suspect leadership, leaders, and culture also are going to figure quite strongly. Over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everybody. You might be feeling, oh no, not leadership again. What on earth is there new to say about leadership? Well, maybe I'm not saying anything new, but I love to challenge accepted wisdom, and I hope I can just stimulate your thoughts on this. If you were here in the end of January when Neil Farmer spoke, he quoted the billions of dollars which are spent on leadership development, and he questioned the effectiveness. He said only 1 in 6, he believed, had any effectiveness. Well, I myself worked for 15 years at London Business School, specifically designing and directing programs for organizations, as well as directing company programs through my own consultancy. And so what have I learned about that? Well, I have never forgotten the chief executive of a major retail company in the UK, a name that you all know, a FTSE retail firm, asking me to evaluate their leadership program that had been running for 3 years. In obvious frustration, he said to me, "We've spent £1 million on this, and I'm damned if I can see that we have any better managers, leaders than anybody else." Well, I can only cover 2 short things in my very short slot, but the CEO's statement prompts me towards the first one, and it's this. We did evaluate their program, and we found that not that many, but not all, many, without doubt, individual leaders felt they had benefited considerably themselves. They had more self-awareness, they had more self-confidence, and so on. It was a personal development thing, no doubt. And that's a good outcome. That's a good outcome. But secondly, when we looked at what other people were observing, using a kind of 360 approach of stakeholders in each person's learning, we found that nobody had actually noticed very much change had taken place in the workplace. And why would that be? Well, it's true, isn't it? And it very much relates to what Rupprecht has been telling us. Organizations are systems. They have culture, they have history, they have systems, they have processes. And our people go off and get trained on leadership at a business school or whatever, but then they come back into the system. So, for example, they come back bright-eyed and bushy-tailed into that absorbing system. Maybe they learned all about the behaviors of an empowering manager, good stuff. But then they come back and find that finance or HR or the regulators have managed to squash all possibilities for truly empowering their people. And so retires. So what I concluded from all this is that we need to classify leader development maybe more as an employee benefit than kid ourselves that we're investing in something really important for the organization. And a very nice benefit it is. I tried very hard as a leader myself to make sure I got on a business school program, and I did, and I really enjoyed it. It was great. When I came back, by the way, nobody seemed very interested in what I'd learned, but that's another story. But that is different, isn't it, from developing the leadership of an organization, which can be very powerful. And that means creating a collective change mindset as part of a reset of strategy, or culture. led from the top, so that our leaders go back into an environment which is changing, a system that is changing, where all leaders are trying to reinforce what is going to be new. And that can be amazingly powerful. It's trying to operate differently. So I used to ask clients at LBS, is it leaders or leadership that you wish to develop? Because actually I'll propose different programs. And I'm sorry to say that they often looked at me blankly. What are you talking about? My second observation, if I may make it quickly, is the obsession that HR has, particularly HR, with behavioural development is well out of balance. When Terminal 5 opened, you will remember, I think, it was a model of incompetence. And in the UK, I'm not talking about Germany here, in the UK over the last year, I think we can all quote a few models of incompetence that we've seen. Incompetence in management. I looked up Heathrow's website at the time, and surprise, surprise, they did publish a set of leadership competencies that all their leaders had been through. Fantastic. I'm sure they were great at inspiring their people. The problem was they didn't know how to manage the show. So I think we have lost something that back when I were a lad was what we talked about. We talked about developing managers and helping them to learn things and how to manage. So what has happened to management skills training? If you look in the syllabuses that are available for you to buy, you have to struggle to find them. And we take it for granted, perhaps, that, well, they just come naturally to managers, don't they? Well, actually, they don't. And this is the irony. The irony is that good leaders, and there will always be a shortage of them, always has been and always will be, they don't need training because for them it does come naturally. I rest my case.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That's great. And actually, it's quite interesting because I was chatting with the Terminal 5, the risk manager there, and he said, well, we delivered a program of 4.2 billion on time, on budget. The accounts team thought that 3 days at a cost of £3 million a day would be enough to test it. We needed one extra day. So for the sake of £3 million, the whole project went under. And actually, they delivered 4.2 billion on time. So I think, like anything, it's the silos within which are actually as much a problem as anything else. Over to
the building of it was great. It was the implementation of making
exactly.
it work.
Yeah, spot on. Anyway, Francesca, your thoughts for today.
Hi, Richard, and thank you, everybody. That was a range of really interesting insight. Let me just pick on two things. I could pick on so many. Going back to the innovation and how do you make innovation come alive? For a long time, I think many people have had in their sort of business strategy something around we're going to be very innovative, and it's really good to hear people challenging around how can you really be innovative as an organization. You don't magically become that. It reminded me of a client that I was dealing with quite a few years ago, and they'd had a strategy update, and in there they'd come up with a line saying they were going to be the most innovative organization in their particular sector. But this wasn't an innovative business. They didn't have a structure or a culture or I'd never seen them do anything innovative in the whole of the time I'd spent with them. They were very, very good business, but innovation, it wasn't really their strength. So what was fascinating was they just plucked the phrase out. And so I just asked the obvious questions. How are you going to do that? And there was this deadly silence. And they sort of went, well, maybe that. And I think there's something quite intriguing about just saying you're innovative isn't making you innovative. How do you actually do it? And actually being a thoughtful follower can sometimes be as good as being a leading edge innovator. And for many, many professional services firms, thoughtful following, picking up the things that are helpful, thinking them through is sometimes a really good way of taking innovation into an organization. And I thought Tim really brought out some elements of that. I was smiling a lot as Andrew was talking about those internal barriers to change. You know, you go on a great program, but you set nothing in train to help it work. And first thing this morning, before we came on the panel, I was chatting to a Belgian newspaper, as you do, and we were talking about International Women's Day and the slow progress towards balanced senior leadership teams. And he sort of said to me the thing that gets asked every year: why is it taking so long? And that's because it takes such a long time to make behavioural change, which we've talked about a lot on this programme, but it gets reflected in absolutely everything. Slow progress is at least progress.
Fantastic. Rupprecht, how do you sort of marry the hard process to the behavioural stuff that we've been possibly talking a bit about more today as well? How does the mélange work there for you?
Well, you can. I described in the third thesis the cultural backward reengineering, which allows a law firm to take action on specific dimensions impacting the values and the behaviors. Yes, that is one part to the answer, and the classic part to the answer, but still true, is to lead by the example, and that starts with the partners, and that they really understand what this all is about. And we just had a discussion with the partnership on some behavioral change in the partnership, and their leader, the way how they lead themselves and their teams, and notions like new ways of working, yes, leadership models. There were no connections to all of that, and I think then it's difficult to talk about behavioral change and cultural change. It's absolutely necessary that partners start going ahead, as a good example. I can't hear you. You're muted, I guess.
Andrew, if I can bring you in, to what extent do you see this as being a mindset issue, that the leader can't understand how other people see life the way that they see it?
Well, I think that's all part of the personal development, isn't it? Self-awareness. Self-awareness, you know, the nirvana of self-awareness is I now see myself the way everybody else sees me. That's what we all want to try to get to, isn't it? And I think actually a lot of leader development does really take people along that path. But if you try and say, and how has that actually benefited our business, that is more difficult, because it's a very internal thing. Some people might notice it around them, but it doesn't necessarily make a difference to the organization. I just wish that organizations would spend more time thinking about the importance of culture and the importance of how people need to be trained together, to get that collective learning is so powerful. Trained together to change the organization. That's what is really needed.
And do you think, just staying with that for a second, Andrew, that the fact that people are now thinking about a lot of training being delivered online, level playing field, people being able to work that way, is that going to make it easier or harder, do you think?
I personally think it'll make it harder. I know Tim works in a business school, and I have as well for many years now, and there really isn't any substitute from people being together. And it's the same, of course, for students in the university. There really isn't a substitute. And I think a lot of the things we want to learn, we've got to be able to debate together. And it's just not quite the same. Marvelous Zoom is, and Teams and all that stuff. It's not the same. Body language, etc., etc. So I think it is makes life more difficult.
Tim, let me bring you into that one. Please, you can.
Yeah, well, I mean, as someone who has kind of enjoyed face-to-face teaching and learning with students throughout my career, I mean, the pandemic's kind of thrown that up into the air, obviously. And I think if I was asked to have taken a business school to deliver online provision in the window that was required, then it really would kind of never have happened, I think, without the pandemic. So we, like every other organisation, have had to adapt. And I completely agree with Andrew that brings challenges and that we need to rethink. Now, as part of the project that we've been working on, from March last year, we were intending to go into firms to deliver face-to-face design sprints, which absolutely does what Andrew talked about, bringing together people from across organizations, from the kind of firm-wide leader right the way through to those that are kind of starting their careers in some of these organizations, to think about what those innovation challenges are and how they can be addressed, and really trying to, picking up on some of the points that have been made this morning about culture, particularly how we can open that culture and embrace innovation as part of it. We, like every other organization, both on the project and our kind of core business, have had to pivot. A horrible word that's well overused, but we are now doing things online, and I have to say that they improve every time we do them. We continue to learn, and that is both as a project and, I suppose, with my kind of Oxford Brookes hat on as well, looking at what colleagues are doing and how they're working. Undoubtedly, there are different challenges. And I think that for us as educators and facilitators, trying to kind of make the most in that space to try and bring back those kind of water cooler socialized moments of how we do this is an extraordinary challenge, but not an impossible one. And I think that in some ways, and I've used the phrase before, that we're not going to bounce back from the pandemic. We're going to bounce forward. And already we're talking about what that means for embedding and kind of incorporating blended learning for the future. When we think about those that are in their school education at the moment, my daughter's sat in the other room using Zoom to engage with her classroom while she's not allowed to be there. But that will fundamentally transform learners' expectations for the future. And we need, as educational providers, to respond to that. And I think that is where we need the businesses that we're working with on some of our professional education side and through the projects to work with how they're changing as well. So I absolutely agree with Andrew's point that, yes, the face-to-face has always been the way. I miss a whiteboard, a pen, and being able to talk problems through. But I think we also need to try and think about how we can respond to what are likely to be changes that are longer standing. So for me, it's a great opportunity for business model innovation in the university to think about how we develop. And we have to say that there are organizations with kind of global recognition, whether that is the likes of the Open University, whether it is FutureLearn and Coursera, who are doing online learning by the masses. And I think that what we need to do is to try and work out how we do that value-added element that isn't the MOOC, the mass online course, and how we can really add value in a much more bespoke way. So lots of challenges, but lots of opportunities at the same time.
Francesca, can I bring you in here and just kind of talk a little bit about your experience as Grant Thornton, if you like, here, and how that thinking has been translated into your internal training courses, which I know you run a lot of.
We do, and a lot of our member firms run courses for their own people or for regions as well. I think to Tim's point, without the pandemic, we would have all edged our way, I suspect, to better ways of delivering virtual learning. But that speed and rapidity has been driven by that need to start doing things. Three things have really struck me. One is about how easy it is to get people to actually turn up to events, because the absence of other great things to be doing has meant that people have actually craved having some kind of communal spirit. So we did an induction event for people who joined the network over the relatively recent months, and we did it across Europe. Normally we'd have done it per firm or maybe done it with a few firms. We did it across Europe. 1,200 people turned up to it. That's something you can do. You can do scale virtually in an interesting way. The second learning is you don't want to do lots of show and tell. That's incredibly dull. You need to find innovative ways of doing it. It could be simple as the old-fashioned panel. It can be different software that helps you to do virtual breakouts. It can be whiteboarding that you're doing online with smaller groups. So there's some brilliant tech out there that can really help. But I think the third thing is about really encouraging people to engage and communicate. And that's something that it's been quite easy for people to go, oh, we can't meet, so we'll kind of let the learning perhaps drop back a little bit. And I've seen the smarter leaders really going, no, use this opportunity to learn more. Use this opportunity to develop your talents and develop those talents. They're going to help you in the new world. Crave learning as opposed to seeing it as something that perhaps will wait until the pandemic is over. So I think the opportunity to learn is huge. and also the ability to actually access great learning. It's only a click away, isn't it? There's some terrific learning that might be run by other organisations that you can access. A bit like coming to panels like this. You hear great stuff, you learn, it sparks you, makes you think of different things. That's learning in all its different forms.
Fantastic. Tim, I just wanted to ask you a quick question, if I may. We heard a little bit earlier from Francesca about one of her clients that for which the word innovative was not one that was in their vocabulary. As an expert in this area, what would your advice be to such a firm? How would they actually go about instilling a culture of innovation? And I appreciate that's a long question, but just quickly, what are the key issues that occur to you in that context?
God, there's nothing like throwing the challenging question at me with 2 minutes to go on cultures of innovation. I think in some ways what we need to do is we need to try and make sure that there is that kind of openness, like I said, and understanding how we don't stand still. Any firm that stands still is actually going backwards. And I think that is with regards to kind of technology, but it's also with regards to how they interact and engage with their clients as well. So I suppose in some senses, it brings me back down to where we started and some of the observations you made at the beginning, which is around communication and listening particularly. I think there's a danger in some professional firms, and I say some, that they listen to themselves. I think we need to listen to the clients and we need to listen outside and really think about how we can do what I would call outside in innovation, look at what the market needs, look at what clients needs and think how to respond. That doesn't necessarily have to be about digital. It can be about a whole range of things, but actually making sure that we're informed and that we're responding will always mean that we are doing the best for our clients and the best for the market. So if we do that, and that is a culture that we can have from both the top down and the bottom up, I think that's absolutely the way to kind of move the innovation agenda forward.
Thanks, Tim. That was really good. And I think, unfortunately, we've come to that magic 10 o'clock. So it just remains to say that if you are missed any of the shows, you'll find them all on the Management Library. And that's the link there. And hope you found today valuable. Obviously, please encourage people to come along next week. We've got another interesting and excellent panel. Always try and bring you new ideas. So we're back next Friday. So I'd like to now thank the panel. I'd like to thank Tim, who said he was going to leave early, but hasn't. So that's been great. Thank you for that extra 30 minutes of your life, sir. I'd like to thank Rupprecht for giving us a really great process and a really way of tackling something which for a lot of people is a bit unsure, but really giving it a hard edge. And I'd like to thank Andrew for reminding us that leadership and leaders is not the same thing, and that actually at the end of the day, we're all on a journey, and our job as educators is to help people on their personal journey to get to a great place. So on which happy note, I'd like to thank Francesca as well, who is back next week, I know, and is joined by Jeremy on this occasion as well. So a couple of the regulars and then 2 new exciting guests. And I hope to be in touch with many of you during the week, talk a little bit more about intro lounges. So that's all for now, and look forward to catching up then, and hopefully lots of you coming down to the 17th of March to this fantastic event that Tim's been organising. Bye for now.